Because there's always a case for the government, to some extent, when what two people do affects a third party. There's no case for the government whatsoever in mandating airbags, because airbags protect the people inside the car. That's my business. If I want to protect myself, I should do it at my expense. But there is a... But there is a case for the government protecting third parties, protecting people who have not voluntarily agreed to enter.
Have you ever met Ralph Nader?
Of course, I've debated Ralph Nader many times. I think what troubles me about him is that he wants to run my life for me instead of letting me run my life.
Let's just take a couple of things. If it weren't for Ralph Nader, we would still have those ornaments on the hoods of cars which impale babies and women and children crossing streets. We would still have an auto industry which is totally focused on cosmetics at the expense of sound automotive engineering. We would still have we'd still have an automobile business and its ancillary supplier of tires with difficulties that would be sent out to the public without regard to any problem at all of being asked to account for them.
You know, but more important, take one of those charges, that the cars would be devoted to cosmetics. If people want to spend their money on cosmetics, why shouldn't they? You mean to say you should be prohibited by the government from doing whatever you do to have to give a nice cosmetic image to your viewers?
No.
Yes, that's what I think. We should have the government prevent cars that do not have the safety features. They should not allow cars to be sold just because someone is willing to sacrifice safety for cosmetics. Now, cars are called passenger vehicles for a reason. They have passengers. There's your third party, Milton. Passengers, if they're not protected by these regulations, they can be injured, even though they had nothing whatsoever to do with the purchase of the car. There's also the matter of people loaning their car out to other people, perhaps their teenage son or daughter, that also had nothing to do with the purchase of the car. So that it's not their decision to sacrifice safety for cosmetics. I think if I remember correctly, for a while, the old version of the Volkswagen Bug was built in Mexico, but was not available in the U.S. It was built in Mexico and available in Mexico for a long time after it was discontinued in the U.S. And the reason that it was not available in the U.S. is because it did not meet all the safety regulations. The Mexico version of the old VW Bug, and if I remember correctly, it was due to one of the reasons was it did not have the proper safety glass that is mandated by the U.S. federal government. And when the safety glass, especially like the windshield, there's like some kind of plastic film inside the windshield that keeps it from breaking into shards if your head runs into it. And so now imagine if we did not have the regulations for safety glass for American automobiles and something like that. Any car, if the car manufacturer decided, hey, we're going to cut some corners here and sell the cars without windshields that have the safety glass on it, then you're going to have passengers, potentially, that in an accident, they may not have the proper safety seat belts, if any seat belts at all. So they'll get in an accident, and then the passengers fly through the windshield. Windshield shatters in such a way that there's these big shards of glass that end up decapitating or slice somebody in half. They didn't have any decision to sacrifice the safety when they purchased the car, because they did not purchase the car. They are the third party being harmed by somebody that cheaped out, or the corporation, the car corporation that cheaped out. And even when you're talking about the person who's making the choice to buy this car, they may not be fully aware of all the hazards in something like a car that does not have safety glass for a windshield. And I'm looking back at here, using an example of Mexico again. In addition to vehicles not being required to have all the same regulations, safety regulations that they do in the U.S., at least they didn't back then. But it doesn't seem like they have very good safety regulations for other things as well. Now, we've heard some horror stories of U.S. tourists going to Mexico and drinking tainted alcohol. But for some reason, you don't hear about that in the United States. At least not alcohol that's sealed you buy from the liquor store. Why is that? Because there are regulations that require that make sure that forbid liquor companies from selling alcohol that's tainted with wood alcohol in the U.S. So without ever really fully realizing it, we are being protected proactively by regulations that prevent harm from happening in the first place. And I think that's what the general public and most people want. I mean, I suppose there are some people on the fringe of the radical libertarians that they don't want any regulations. They don't care. That's fine. I mean, maybe they can go live off on some island somewhere. But I think the general public, most people, the so-called silent majority, likes having some regulations in place that protect them as a consumer from harm from happening in the first place. It's not going to have them. They're not looking forward to. They don't want to have to, file a lawsuit or just penalize the company by not shopping with them anymore after they've already been poisoned by something like tainted alcohol. They don't want to have to deal with any of that in the first place, and it's obviously an inadequate means as a disincentive. Like the lawsuits, you often hear like libertarians claim, you can always sue them if they harm you, but well sure, like after you've already been harmed, that's small solace, and it's not necessarily a disincentive, because for some companies, for some kind of harm, you don't even notice it happening until years in the future, or it could be a fly-by-night company that pockets the profits, and by the time you're ready to file your lawsuit, they could be long gone in some foreign country, with all or sitting in some tropical island with all the money that they gained. But it's not like there's really going to be any necessarily a disincentive, because some of the harm that these businesses can cause, like such as smoking, tobacco, there's not necessarily an immediate harm. It can be many years in the future before that harm happens, and then those executives and owners of those the companies can be long ago retired, or they could be just have left the company, and they've pocketed their gains long ago. So it's not much of a disincentive there. So lawsuits are very unreliable means, and they're reactive in nature. They don't prevent the problem from happening in the first place, and I think that's what most people, the general public, wants, is to prevent the harm from happening in the first place, not just be able to react via the market or through lawsuits after they've already been harmed, perhaps very seriously, perhaps to even be killed. Nobody's going to think that's a good enough bargain or way to organize the business world. So we need to have these regulations in place. Otherwise, Milton Friedman was saying, a lot of these companies they made these advances long before the regulations were put in place. Yeah, sure. Like for instance, Mercedes-Benz has been very good at innovating in terms of safety, but whether or not some other manufacturer adopts all those safety features will be just a matter of balances, the risk-reward ratio. How much of a risk is it of like future lawsuits versus the reward of being able to cut costs? And they may decide, well, it's better to get the reward from cutting the costs are greater than the risks of future lawsuits. And you have these checks and balances, and we'll cut the costs and throw in these unsafe, whether it's the windshields or what Phil Donahue was talking about, the hood ornaments will just screw them in place solidly without being collapsible or without being spring-loaded. And so the same thing with steering wheels. They could cost more to have collapsible steering wheels, so they just put it in and fix one that doesn't collapse when if you run into it or have an accident. It's the only way to have any kind of assurance of consistent results of the companies, regardless of the cost of the vehicle, to have safety features, all these safety features that are protecting us from like that safety windshield example, is to mandate it, required by regulations. Otherwise, some are just going to say, hey, we're going to cheap out on this and do whatever we want, and then you have all these consequences, real world consequences. People actually do fly through windshields and get lacerated horribly by the windshields. It's gruesome, but that's the real world. These libertarian free market people like Milton Friedman and Hayek, they're living in a fantasy world. They have their connection to reality is they're just way up there in the clouds with no connection to what actually goes on in the real world. Like that example of people flying through windshields and getting cut in half, basically. That's what happens when they cheap out on these safety features, which inevitably some of them would. Maybe some like luxury brands, maybe they'd always, like Mercedes would always be real safe, but everybody can't afford a Mercedes. What about the poor people? They try to buy whatever they can, get their hands on. Shouldn't they have those safety features as well, or doesn't Milton Friedman think they deserve it? I don't know. I think they do. I think everybody deserves those kind of safety features and be able to count on them to protect them proactively from having harm happening in the first place. That's why we need these regulations. That's the only way to ensure it. Ensure people's some modicum of safety in the real world. Not in Hayek's fantasy world or Milton Friedman's fantasy world. I'm talking about the real world. Yeah, that's the only way we can count on it. On having living in a relatively safe world where we can count on cars having the safety features we need, and we can count on, if we go to the liquor store and we buy a bottle of booze, so we can count on it not being tainted with wood alcohol. It's because of regulations. They prevent harm from happening in the first place. That's what my main point is. That's where my disagreement is with Milton Friedman and Hayek and all those other Chicago school free market libertarians. All right, that's what my points I want to make. Thanks for listening.